12 years ago, the idea that you would put money into young voters was thought of as foolish, stupid, that young people were unreliable, wouldn't turn out to vote. And we have seen them become a real political force and really critical for Democrats to win. I cut my teeth on organizing here in Texas, organizing immigrant workers, but I also launched another organization mobilizing young Latino voters. And when you talk about young voters, you have to talk about the Latino vote. And that is because we represent 1 in 4. I'm sure you guys talk about it all the time. 1 in 4 American children are in the United States Latino, and our real political power lies with young voters, because the most common age for a white American is 55 in this country. For an African American, it's 27, and for Latino American is 11. So if we want to talk about the Latino vote, you have to do that by talking about the youth vote.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Latino Vote podcast, coming from you from the winter wonderland of Washington, D.C., where we got like 6 inches of snow last night. But Mike Madrid, lucky for me, I drive a Jeep monster truck, so it hasn't slowed me down a bit. I got up this morning and there was so much snow on the tarp I got over my Jeep that when I pulled my Jeep out from underneath it, all 4 of them broke down and landed on the ground. That's how much snow we got.
Who drives a Jeep monster truck in Washington, D.C.?
I do.
I know. And you're like the only guy. Like when you see that driving around, folks, that's Chuck Rocha. Like if you're there for a visit or for a conference or meeting with a member or something, and you see a Jeep monster truck.
It is a monster truck.
I know it. I have seen it. I have seen it. It is real. And I'm just like, boy, what, they not like us. I
Remember
mean,
when you saw
see
me
this guy drive? You see this guy driving down D.C. That's just Chuck Rocha. Of course it is.
Remember when you were crossing the hotel down there by the city building and I whipped it around in the middle of the road and went up on the curb? You remember that? I said hi to you because I saw you. Anyway, it's a whole different. We are super excited about our episode today, and we're super excited to have a good friend of mine from Texas. But before I get into introducing our amazing friend from Texas, I have a special request that we're going to start the show with, and we're going to end the show with. So many of you listeners have been so good. We've been giving you this platform for free. We're going to continue to give you this platform for free, but I'm asking one favor of you. Because I am so pretty, I would like for all of you to go watch this on YouTube. But more importantly, go to the Latino Vote podcast YouTube channel where you can watch these on YouTube. Our production team have got a lot of graphics there. Mike can jump in here, but get folks and your friends to like us. And more importantly, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Did I do that right, Mike?
You did it right. And here's what's fascinating is all of our growth has been really organic. And we know that the audience that we have is not just kind of a big and growing audience. It's a really, I'm going to say it, it's a really high quality audience.
Yeah, we're getting somewhere.
Because you get a lot of like elected officials or politicians or journalists, big names calling and saying, hey, I listened to that episode 3 or 4 days ago. And you forget, Chuck, that's maybe it's just because we're a couple old guys, but we forget that people actually listen to the show and kind of paying attention to what we're talking about. So that's great. We love the sense of community that's being built. It will help us if you do subscribe, if you do share, if you help us build those numbers. We are trying to build out this YouTube platform. The podcast numbers are doing great. But all of this allows us to kind of share some of the great insight and some of the wisdom of myself. You get the color commentary from Chuck, but from great guests also, like the one that we have today, Chuck. So why don't you introduce our guest, because I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Cristina Tzintzún is the executive director, big poobah over at the NextGen organization that does all the youth outreach around the country. But in full disclosure, y'all should know that Cristina has been my friend for a long, long time. I remember showing up in Austin because I saw her on the MSNBC show with some big star. What was that guy's name, the movie star, Cristina?
It was Alec Baldwin's show on MSNBC.
Alec Baldwin's show, right. And I saw her on TV. She was in Texas. She was working on workers' rights. I swear to God, I got on the next plane to Austin. I stalked her like a 13-year-old boy, figured out where she worked, got in touch with her, said, can I come meet with you? I went out to Austin, and I drove out to this little barn, literally a little barn out in West Austin. It was not a barn.
It was an office. Though to be fair, you thought we were running this huge operation. We were running a big, ambitious operation, but with like $5.
Exactly. When I got there, I was like, whoa, I've been snookered. Where's all the people at? And Cristina was there just banging it out, trying to make and help all of these immigrant workers from all over Austin have rights at work who didn't have, some of them didn't have papers, some of them didn't have citizenship, some of them, all these things. But that's how we met. Now she's got a big job. She's done lots of things, but I'll stop now. Welcome to the show, Cristina Tzintzún from the great state of Texas.
I have to, Tzintzún. There's an N.
Sorry, my bad.
It's okay.
I'm not really good with English.
I thought that was just his Texan accent,
Right.
but he's
No.
just not good with English.
It's fine.
There's a lot of Z's in her name, just for all of you who are watching on the YouTubes. It's like TZ, TZ, TZ.
Yes, it was a good guess. It was a good guess. Thanks
Tell
for having
people, because you
Glad to
told
be
me
here
this
with
one
you.
time. I'm going to interrupt you again. You told me one time where your name comes from. Will you tell the audience like you told me that time?
So it's my mother's last name. It's Perepucha, which is the largest indigenous group in the state of Michoacan. They were one of the few groups not defeated by the Aztecs, and it means hummingbird. And their capital still exists. It's called Tzintzún in Michoacan. It's a place of the hummingbirds.
Awesome. I knew I loved that
Majestic
story.
warrior creatures that are very tough and mighty and tiny.
Before Mike asks you about this amazing data that you have on what happened with the youth vote this cycle, can you tell our audience a little bit how you and your family got to Texas?
Yeah. So I have a classic Latino story, and that my mom is the oldest of 9 kids from a very poor farm working family in Michoacan, Mexico. Viva los Michoacanos. And my dad is a white American hippie that met my mom while living in Mexico in the 70s with a bunch of folks on a commune. And my white grandpa used to say that we were purebred Irish Mexican Americans. And my dad, I grew up mostly in Ohio, but we did live in Dallas when I was really young, and I hated Ohio because I don't like cold. And my parents said, move to Austin, you'll love it. It has everything you love, which is year-round sunshine, lots of Mexicans, and vegan food, which I think is a Venn diagram that only exists over Austin and LA, perhaps. And so I picked Austin.
Well, I got to introduce you to Marin County. Look, I'm very excited about the conversation because I'm a data nerd, one, but also because anybody dealing with the youth vote in this country, you want to talk to, because obviously that's where the country is heading. But the young people in our country today are foundationally different than the young people of any American generation we have ever produced, because it is so ethnically and racially diverse. And so I want you to talk about that, if you could, for just a little bit, about what the organization does, what you're doing with young people, and perhaps most importantly, what you're seeing that is different amongst young people today that is both good and bad.
Yeah. So I lead NextGen America, which is the country's largest organization mobilizing young voters. We were started 12 years ago with the premise, if we could organize young people to scale as a political force, we could tackle the biggest issue of our time, which is the climate crisis. And I will say that 12 years ago, the idea that you would put money into young voters was thought of as foolish, stupid, that young people were unreliable, wouldn't turn out to vote. And we have seen them become a real political force and really critical for Democrats to win. I cut my teeth on organizing here in Texas, organizing immigrant workers, but I also launched another organization mobilizing young Latino voters. And when you talk about young voters, you have to talk about the Latino vote. And that is because we represent 1 in 4. I'm sure you guys talk about it all the time. 1 in 4 American children are in the United States Latino, and our real political power lies with young voters, because the most common age for a white American is 55 in this country. For an African American, it's 27, and for Latino American is 11. So if we want to talk about the Latino vote, you have to do that by talking about the youth vote.
Well, that's awesome. Can you tell Mike and me and the audience, unlike a lot of people we may have on here who talks about data, and I'll take you back to the amazing episode I've still kind of taken by Dr. Derek from last week, this amazing Latino, Christina. He's a PhD person. He's a doctorate. He's doing Latino studies. He's got all these great papers out. And I was thinking about that, and he comes on with a lot of the data that he's done and had backed up with research. But can you tell Mike and the audience the scope of how many states y'all worked in? Because I think the thing that makes you really different is you had so many people on so many campuses, like live bodies. These aren't polls. And yes, she's got polls and data, but tell everybody about the number of staff in the states that you were working in just the last election cycle.
Yeah. So last election cycle, we were in 8 key battleground states with hundreds of staff. We have an army of 28,000 volunteers. We were on, ended up being on close to 200 community college campuses, talking having hundreds of thousands of conversations with young voters. And some of our key states include Texas and Arizona, Nevada, very, very heavy Latino states that are really critical for Dems to win. Myself living in Texas and some of the changes that people see with the Latino vote is, especially with young voters, and I think, Chuck, you've proven why it's so critical to invest in young Latino voters now, right? When you ran Bernie's campaign in 2020, that was the premise and understanding of how to win was going to be through the Latino vote. That a lot of the portion of the Latino youth vote is up for grabs. And some people want to get upset about that. I'm not upset about it. People ask me, are Latinos Republicans or Democrats? And I say a huge portion of us are neither. We're poor. And so whoever is going to speak to our economic pain first and the power we have to change it is going to win. And so you had a lot of young people become evangelized into politics because Bernie Sanders spent money talking to them about their economic pain and their power. So we still see that a lot on campuses. We still see that Latinos are very much progressive, but also a portion are up for grabs. And it all comes down to talking about people's economic pain through an economic populist message.
Why have Democrats gotten so far away from that? How have they stopped being the party of poor and working class people?
I don't know that they've, I think that we have had something happen in the United States with, I think, both political parties. I don't think that Democrats have stopped being the party of working class people. I think that Republicans, right, if we look at how politics are funded in this country and what issues people are willing to talk about, when we talk about progressive policies of raising the minimum wage to a living wage, when you talk about some of the policies that Bernie supported, making universal health care a right in this country because we are the only industrialized planet on the country not to have that. When you talk about unions and massive support, especially amongst Latinos for unions, those are all Democratic issues. I think the challenge is that people have not been spending the time and money connecting with people around specifically those class issues and digging in deep, especially in the Latino community. I think with the Latino population in particular, we suffer two double whammies. One is people say Latinos are unreliable. They don't turn out and vote as high as numbers as other ethnic groups. So they don't spend the time and money on us. And then we're young, and young voters also suffer from that. So, and if you ask most people that don't vote why they didn't vote, they say, no one contacted me. Well, the majority of young voters and Latino voters will report every single election that no candidate or campaign talked to them, and especially around these economic issues. And Republicans have been spending time and money making inroads. And so to me, it's not a question so much of policy alignment. It's, are we messaging? Are we spending the time and money to message to the population? Are we making a long-term play for this population that is up for grabs? And the thing that bothers me the most, I will say from progressive Democratic donors, is blaming Latinos for how they vote when they haven't spent the time and money on reaching the Latino electorate. If you don't like how they're voting, what have you done to support the organizations that organize them? That's my real question to the people that want to complain about the Latino vote and how Latinos have voted.
In your research that I was just skimming through, and I haven't dug into it deep, you openly admit this move to more youth voters voting Republican in the last election, and that the Democrats still won the youth vote, but it was by the smallest margin that they ever have. Tell me the things that your organizers were telling you on the ground of, other than just an economic message or people's frustration. And I don't want to answer it for you. Just tell me the truth of, like, what were the things that made these young voters find Donald Trump or the Republicans appealing?
Well, I think what we had the last three elections previous to this election, you had the highest youth voter turnout in American history, 2018, 2020, and 2022. You also had the highest margins by which Democrats won the youth vote. Now, historically, people have always said, oh, young voters are more progressive. And that's actually not true. It wasn't until about 2004 with George Bush, where it was still divided half and half, the youth vote, between Democrats and Republicans generally. And then you saw a big change with Obama, and it stayed that way, that they have been winning the youth vote. Now, what happened this past election, which we still don't have a lot of data back, is that there was a huge drop off in youth voter turnout generally. So there were 11 million people we know that didn't vote this past election. Many were young people that voted in 2020. There was an close to an 8% drop off in youth voter turnout across the country. Most of those voters were Democrats or voted Democrat and progressive. There was a huge effort invested by Republicans. We don't have the full numbers from Turning Point USA, the largest right-wing youth group, but you've seen an explosion of their budget. In 2022, their budget grew to $100 million. It used to be much smaller. 2024, we don't know the numbers, but you can assume it's much, much larger. So they've been spending money on targeting young men, young Latino men, young Black men, really speaking to them about their grievances and economic pain. There are a lot of misinformation and disinformation online. And so to me, the call is, how are we responding to that? At NextGen, we already knew there was a huge gender gap. Actually, the gender gap was larger for Democrats in 2022 than in 2024. So this election, everyone's been talking about the gender gap, but it was actually larger in 2022. You had more men than women voting. Like the spread was 19 points versus 17 points for this election. So a 2-point difference, not huge, but enough to say that it was even bigger. So, we saw that that was a pain point, and we developed MVP, Men's Voter Power Campaign, to target and connect with young men, especially young men of color, through culture, through music, doing events at barbershops, doing community basketball events, working with young men that now can use their image and likeness, that are athletes at their colleges and leaders in their community, to talk about elections and what's at stake. But I will say that work we were going around trying to get people to invest in this work, because we have a ridiculous system in the United States where we don't have publicly financed campaigns. And so, donors are who fund our electoral work, which, if we ever want to fix our democracy, is going to have to be fixed as well. But they kept saying, we don't want to fund that work. We want to fund the college campus organizing work. So I think that there was a failure to understand and invest in the signs that were clearly already indicated from 2022, that there was a big pain point coming with young men that were already trending towards Republican, and trying to understand and peel away why that was. There was, and especially non-college educated young people, there was a failure to invest in that work.
And that's what you attribute all this movement towards, the shift.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, you can't run an effective campaign if you don't have the resources to do it. And if you're not investing in those populations, part of the reason you all do the work you have done is like screaming at the top of our lungs to get Democrats to invest in the Latino population, right? And say, I think we're all in agreement that demographics are not destiny. They're simply a core ingredient in the recipe for change. And people have failed to invest in us. They expect us to turn out for Democrats without investing in our power. The reason, I see myself as an independent progressive, even though I vote for Democrats and have aligned with Democrats, because I believe they are the party that most align on the policies that impact our community, that can benefit the fact that we're the ethnic group that's least likely to have healthcare, double the national rate in this country, that we're the least likely to go to college, that, nearly half of Latinos make under $15 an hour, that if Democrats ran on these progressive policies and had power, our community could widely benefit. But I also don't think any party or politician are saviors. I believe people will be saviors to themselves. But we can't expect people to turn out if they're not spending the time and money on our community.
Did you see any difference, and if your work, any difference in young folks that weren't in college? Were you organizing anywhere, and did you see any dramatic differences? Look, me and Mike talk about this, and me and Mike are screaming examples. We're almost the same age. He's got a great degree. He's went to Georgetown. He looks at the world differently. At the end of the day, we both want what's best for our community, but I never went to college, and I went to work in a factory when I was 19. It just means me and Mike are trying to get to the same place, but we have much different thoughts about how we get there, but we do want what's best for our community. So I'm thinking about these youth, of a young man who's like me. I was 20 years old. I was working. I had a truck, I had long hair, I had a gun, I had a motorcycle, and much different than maybe somebody who was in LA or San Francisco or New York, wherever they are going to college. Not that they're not a 20-year-old young man, but did you see differences between college and non-college educated youth in the research that you did?
Yeah, so we've done research over the last few cycles, and we segment who young people are, right? Of course, race is a big way you segment. You segment by gender. And then we also started to segment by college versus non-college. And that was actually one of the largest distinctions about how people saw parties or what problems they had. And of course, the majority of Americans do not have a college degree, right? Close to 60% of Americans over the age of 24 do not have a college degree. And I think people really, really forget that. When they talk about young people, they only talk about young people as college kids. Now, we do our organizing on college campuses because it's low-hanging fruit, and young people don't generally live in like one geography, but on campuses they do. So you want to be able to do that work on campuses. But then you also have to meet people online and do work digitally as well, and in community events. And so we have, for example, one of the challenges with targeting and connecting with young men, especially young men that are not college educated, is that there's a lot of social isolation, right? Social isolation on multiple levels. You have, just as a stat to show people kind of people's social isolation, you have more and more young men saying they don't have as many close friends. More and more young men actually not even engaged in sexual activity. So 1 in 3 young men have no sexual partner. This is the highest level of like celibacy that you've ever had in history since it's been being recorded in the United States. So how do you meet those young men? So we developed through our MVP campaign, gaming has shot through the roof. Young people, especially young men doing gaming. We developed Voti, this chat bot that exists on Discord and Twitch, and we've gotten like top gamers where young people can ask, young men in particular can ask it about elections and what's upcoming and what issues they care about, so that we can reach young men at scale through these social media platforms. But there has been a huge breakdown of that's furthered social isolation, especially amongst young men. That is a big challenge, I think, for Democrats as well. And you'll see some of that anxiety come out in their voting patterns as well.
Mike?
I don't know if anybody's noticed, but I'm wearing a jacket today, which is very, very rare.
You look very handsome, Mike.
I thought you had dressed up for Christina. I was really impressed.
I feel great about it.
I appreciate that. And it's because I got an invitation to go speak to the Senate Democratic caucus here in the state with the charge of helping them understand what the hell happened in the elections. And so I'm consuming all of this and trying to kind of breathe it in and saying, okay, this makes sense. This doesn't make sense. And what I really am trying to do and trying to work with, and I'm a Republican, but everybody knows my story. I'm a Lincoln Project Republican. I don't believe much in either party. I think they're both full of shit. I don't think that either of them understands at all our community, and I don't see them actually really trying to do the hard work of trying to get to understanding. It's just my opinion. But I have to go into this meeting in about an hour, and I have to explain why Latino precincts rejected minimum wage increases in California in 2024. I have to explain to them why they voted for the strongest crime and punishment measures in California history on the same ballot, why they shifted by double digits to the right broadly, not just for Donald Trump, although that's where the effect was the largest, but also for DSA candidates like in places like Los Angeles, right? And this is California. There is no Republican presence. But what I did notice also was nationally, we talked about this a lot on the show, the Republicans pulled almost all of their ground game money in the spring, all of it. They shut down all of their Latino outreach offices. They shut down all of their African-American outreach offices. They shut it down. They were not doing door-to-door nationally. They were not doing door-to-door organizing with monies. Maybe they might have been locally in small certain areas, but they certainly were not investing in those areas. And as a professional political consultant, it's really hard for me to go to elected officials, meet with their consultants, and say, just keep doing what you're doing. Your issues are working. Your tactics are working. Because in the most Latino dense state by far in the union, even here now, even in California, it's not working. It's not. And so I at some point, there has to be some recognition that it's not a tactical issue. There's a policy problem. Latinas moved to the right. It wasn't just Latinos. Latinas are saying, ya basta, enough. This isn't working. Like, it's not working. Older Latinos middle-aged Latinos, young Latinos, broadly. And it didn't just happen in this year. It's been going on for over a decade. And so what I'm trying to do, what I'm asking for you is your advice before I go in and speak to these folks to say, what do I tell the Senate Democrats that they need to do differently because this is what they're asking me to come in and advise them on?
I mean, to me, always the question is how much campaigns and candidates are spending on the Latino vote, really, and like with what messages. I think the policies sometimes are correct. Sometimes they're not. They're not simple, right? Like when you talk about tax rebate programs, when Harris was talking about the Latino jobs plan that included a lot of tax rebates, like it was difficult to try and package and sell as it was packaged to the Latino population, right? And that's why I said I don't think a huge portion has always been, I live in Texas, a huge portion of the Latino vote has always been up for grabs, right? It's still majority Democratic, but those numbers are shrinking, right? Or they've shrunk the last few election cycles. But that's also because the majority of our power comes within the Latino youth vote, which is the double whammy I spoke about. People, the Democratic Party, candidates, campaigns do not invest in the youth vote. And the reason they don't do that is because they see them as unreliable voters or new voters. Some of them don't even have a vote score. So for nerds that don't pay attention, right, like you get a score based on your voting history in this country, and campaigns target you. Campaigns usually only target people that they believe are going to be reliable to turn out and vote their way. And then they have a small persuasion universe of independents, which are really small. Republicans, what they're doing are saying these huge portions of the electorate are up for grabs. We're going to go after them and expand our universe. I do not see Democrats trying to expand their universe. What I see them consistently trying to do is look over and over again at who already voted, talk to those voters, and then look at a very small, slim margin of the population that they think are independents and up for grabs, right? They're not actually true independents, right? And they usually trend to be more white. They're not focused on the voters of color, especially Latino and Black voters. And they just keep expecting that we're going to turn out and vote their favor, but they're not spending the time and money on us.
But neither are the Republicans.
No, I do see that the Republicans
are.
No,
they're not. I can tell you quantifiably they are not. They are not. They've spent less money. They've spent, hold on a second. Hold on, it's my show. They have spent less money now than ever in my entire 30-year career working in Republican politics. Ever. I did George W. Bush's work when we were hitting the 40s and spending tons of money. They are spending they're certainly not spending Latino-directed dollars. There may be overlap with third, fourth generation, which I would argue is where they're making most of the incursions. But there are not ground game organizations in Latino communities.
Ground games. I'm
telling the audience.
Yeah.
There's no question they're beating Democrats on analytics. But what I will say is the investment by Republicans in ethnic communities has decreased as a specific target to the lowest point I've ever seen in 30 years, and their numbers are going through the roof.
So what I actually see, I don't see ground game. What I see is a lot of messaging and targeting on Latino radio and mail and social media. So, for example, I have voted Democrat my entire life. I only voted left and lefter, right? Like that's it. But I have started to, as a Latina mom, get targeted through mail by Republicans here in Texas on things that I was on trans issues, bilingual messaging, about protecting my kids on crime. I shouldn't be anywhere in their universe. There were other Latina moms I spoke to that they started to get targeted as well. Even SMS programs. That was an expansion. There's no way I should be in their universe. So to me, that shows that they are expanding. I don't think that they're doing it with ground game. I think they're spending a lot of time, misinformation, disinformation on social media. We've seen the expansion of all of that on different platforms. And I don't think we understand the full effect of that. And so for me, I do see it. I don't see it in ground game, though.
I think another thing to tell your Democratic Senate camp, whatever the hell they are, I would say that they've probably worked with the same group of people for a long time.
Yeah.
And as a Democratic consultant, the one thing that I've noticed is that all campaigns, and I don't know about Republicans, but I know on the Democratic side, we still use the same formula. Christina touched on a piece of it, which is persuasion targeting over turnout targeting. But the bottom line is, if you have the same posters, Democratic senatorial campaign in California, who is asking the same questions, and then you take the persuadable voters in that poll, Mike, you've done this a million times, and then go run a paid communication to those people, then we put all the money on TV and maybe in radio. California's different because of such expensive media markets. They've done that over and over. And you saw Republicans, as this Latino vote has come of age, you see us start moving away from economic populism, in other words. Then you have Donald Trump, who's talking about manufacturing jobs in America, talking about all kinds of no taxes on tips, whatever it is. But Senate Democrats, you're probably doing the same thing we've all done for the last 20 years or 10 years. And I think that you have a whole group of Latino voters coming of age, and you have older voters, I get that too, who Democrats haven't spoke to and all the things. And I think in my mind, if I was talking to them today, which I'd be a lot more charming and they would like me more, but I would say that they've just done the same thing and you have to move. I haven't seen any changes in Washington, Mike, so I'm sure there haven't been any changes in California.
That's what I'm getting at. I'm not trying to be cabron here, although I'm very good at it. What I'm trying to point out is there's something wrong with the Democratic Party. I don't believe that they understand Latino voters. I wrote a book about it. I've been talking about it for a decade. I'm like, this is coming. The data is very clear. This is very obvious. And yet nothing does change. And it's not, in my estimation, this is has nothing to do with tactics. Nothing to do with tactics. Voters are smarter than that. I don't hear the AAPI community going, if you only invested more in us and spent more money with us, then we'd have bigger numbers. I don't even see that with black voters. I see it only see it with our community. So at a certain point, it's not Mike Madrid and the data saying you're not the party of the working class. It's working class voters saying we're done, we're moving, we're leaving, we're voting with our feet. And when I see stuff like minimum wage measures losing in the largest Latino state by far in the union, when I see dramatic numbers, bigger than whites, voting for Prop 36, which is to increase sentencing for petty and retail thefts in California, when I see affordability far worse in the bluest of blue states in California for our community, hurting our community, when for 30 years the polling has been saying we need to build, we need to remove these environmental regulations to actually support my family to have a home. Literally, that's the fight that's going on in LA, the fight between Altadena and the Palisades, which both burned down. A working class, Latino largely, and black community, Altadena, fighting with the Palisades. And the answers are obvious from people who are desperate and burned out the home. People are saying, we can't, you've created so many regulations, we can't get our own life back, let alone what future we had. You're taking it from us now. This is the fight with Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom. This is what they're dealing with, this blowback. I'm not worried about the rich people in the Palisades. This is their second, third home. And even if it's not, I don't mean to be, callous, but they're going to be okay. I'm not worried about rich people. I'm worried about poor people. I'm worried about working class people. They need help, and they're not getting it from the Democrats at any level. This is just not a Latino problem, by the way. This is happening with every immigrant group from every country in the world. In this country is shifting to the right. And I don't think it's just misinformation. I think it's obvious that people are hurting, and where these dense communities are in urban blue areas where policies aren't working. And so when I hear, and I appreciate and I valorize your work. I'm genuinely trying to learn here because I don't have a whole lot of time to go speak to these folks and saying, you gotta change. You gotta. It's not just about giving more to do the same. And maybe I'm missing the point here. And if I am, I apologize. But if I'm missing what's new, then share that with me.
Well, I think one of the things that's new, and I'll kick it over to Christina, is that, and I don't know the answer to this, but there's one fact that doesn't lie, which is the people that voted. You know how they voted. They turned down these measures. But it's also to say that, you bring this up at the Senate race, whatever we were selling in the last election in the Senate caucus, it caused 3.6 million less Democrats to vote in California who just weren't motivated to even show up.
Yeah.
While you had about the same amount of Republicans, right now it's about 180,000 more Republicans, which is nothing in a 4-year cycle. Should be much more than that, but at least they got their same voters back. While there was over 3 million of our folks who was like, it's not even that important to go vote for the minimum wage or for this person for whatever state rate race is. And so then you start seeing this shift of the vote you're talking about. Now, that's just from a consultant side thinking about this, about we're not even good enough at it to get people to motivate to say to come do it. And then it's California, which to me is a one-off, not that it's more important or less important, but there's no Senate race, there's no real presidential. So then you see how much social media, into what Cristina was saying, you have these social impacts of people around you, especially these young people that are like, Democrats ain't cool. And Republicans seem kind of cool, or at least they're going to break some shit, and it's not the same old shit in this Democratic city. Am I hitting on something for you, Cristina? You're shaking your head.
I mean, to me, I think that, and it goes back to what I said, I think our population is extremely poor. I think the entire country is in deep economic pain, and they feel so broken that they want to break the system. And whoever was offering to break the system to try anything, I think you're going to see a swing back the other way, because I don't think Trump's policies are actually going to address people's economic pain. I think that there has been a lack of understanding of just how critical it is for people. I think of just like people's deep economic pain, right? The fact that you have such a huge percentage of Americans that don't have more than like $1,000 in savings. For Latinos, it's like $400 more in savings for a serious crisis. People look around and they're like, I can't keep doing this. And that's fair for them to feel like they can't keep doing this. And I do agree that the current status quo doesn't work. And so a lot of Democrats were offering to maintain the status quo. And people said, no, I need to rip this apart. I need to change this because it doesn't work for me. We are living in the most unequal time in American history. You can't talk about the fact that like all of these margins are changing when you don't talk about the inequality, right? Like that is why people are voting. Number one issue people vote on is the economy. We're living in the greatest unequal time in American history, greater than the Gilded Age, where the top 1% has 15 times more wealth than the bottom half of America. And you talk about Latinos, those numbers are even greater. So it is a problem when they're not speaking to that pain boldly enough, and they don't have a clear villain about who's responsible for it. That was also my critique for this election, was it wasn't clear when I listened to Harris who was responsible for people's economic pain. Now, Republicans said it was poor brown and black immigrants that, pick your vegetables and clean your toilets and build your homes. And also Democrats who were in charge. So it was easy to blame them. I didn't really hear who was responsible for people's economic pain. And I think, say what you will about Bernie's policies, he won a huge swath of the Latino vote. And he won because he had a clear economic message and he spent money on them. I think the recipe is there for how you win the Latino vote. I don't think some of them want to do it or haven't been willing to. That's it.
As we think about getting to the end of this show and thinking about being optimistic here at the end, like I know, Cristina, you have a young son. He's a little bit older than my grandsons, and thinking about these turbulent times that we're living through and thinking about all these young folks on college campuses. We like to end these things and talk about, like, we dissect all the problems every week, and especially with Donald Trump now, like all the things, I don't want to go through any of the things that are just nonstop coming at us. But doing this work in all of these states, looking at your son, thinking about all the things that we have ahead of us, what gives you hope today? What makes you feel optimism while so many in our community who are under attack, whether they're immigrants or whether they're whoever it is today, somebody's under attack, some poor federal worker at some administration somewhere getting fired or whatever. Like, what are the things that give you hope?
I think the thing that gives me hope are young Latinos that feel really disgusted. I think the thing I'm going to go back to is of course, I think, obviously, Chuck, I know, I don't know if Mike knows, but like when there were all these anti-immigrant Latino bills being passed in Texas, we took 15 girls in their quinceañera dresses down to the Texas Capitol to do this beautiful protest where they sang where they danced to Lin-Manuel Miranda's "Immigrants Get the Job Done" and "Somos Más Americanos" by Tigres del Norte. And it was just a symbol of like, this state this country does not exist without us. You can try and make us feel like outsiders, but we're actually, even the term minority and majority, right? Like we've become the majority ethnic group, and yet it's still termed minority. We are constantly tried to be made to feel like outsiders in our own state, in our own country. And while I do not think demographics are destiny, I think the image of those young girls with their fists up in the air, with tiaras protesting, in their quinceañera dresses, saying to these legislators, we represent the future, you represent the past. That is what gives me hope. I feel like I have one of the greatest jobs on earth, which is I get to go organize young people at scale to own their political power in a time of great strife, in a time of great inequality, when I believe our entire democracy needs remade. I don't believe it needs remade in the image of Donald Trump and authoritarianism. I think it needs remade to build an economy for everyone where we do not have such grotesque inequality. And ultimately, I put my faith and hope in America's young people, because anytime our country has made a great leap forward, it has taken the impatience, the courage, and imagination of young people. And I think it's going to take it again.
Mike?
I just want to say I'm so grateful for your work, and it must be an absolute gift to be able to work with young people who are just, despite so many odds, despite so many barriers, despite this horribly dark moment in American history, remain optimistic and aspirational and fighting for a better tomorrow and feeling we're demanding their place at the table. So thank them for us. That's really, I think, what the debate and the discussion that needs to happen in our community. And I'm grateful that you're leading it, that you're helping foster it, because without a really, really self-reflective discussion on who we are and where we're going and what's working and what's not, we're never going to get there. I am much more optimistic than most people are. This is a shitty time. Don't get me wrong. This is a bad time. But that's where character is forged. That's through conflict, through struggle, is where you become a better people. The pain points we're suffering now will make us a better people broadly. I think it's going to make a stronger Latino community if we are committed to that mission, and if we are willing to fight for that better tomorrow. And it must be really inspiring to see young people doing that.
Christina, tell us where all of our audience can follow you and the organization, where they can sign up to volunteer at the organization or donate.
Yeah, they can go to nextgenamerica.org and they can follow us on any platform that way. And you can follow me at Christina NextGen. Christina spelled the Mexican way with no H.
And for those of you who ain't following Christina, let me give a little personal point of privilege. Not only does she have the cutest son that I have ever seen besides my boy, she lives on a hippie farm down in Austin, where she's also outside gardening all the time, taking in homeless people into the little house behind her house. I follow every day, Christina. She's out trying to do all kinds of stuff around helping her local community while running this national org. And I'll be down in Austin. I hope we can hook up in March to see you. And thank you again for joining us. And all for the rest of you out there, don't forget how we started this show. And we want you to become a subscriber to our YouTube channel, the Latino Vote Podcast on YouTube, where you can see all of our faces today. You can see Mike Madrid in a blazer, which he normally doesn't have. He's going to go talk to Democrats. He is stunning, Christina said. He is ornery because he's got to go talk to a bunch of Democrats about why they suck, which he loves.
Yeah.
Don't forget to like us, subscribe, share with your friends and family. And until next time, we'll see you next week.